500k phone compo for migrants. No wonder my viewers and listeners are tearing their hair out.
Oh, people are going mad about stories like this because they are so infuriating. I think your caller Sean will have spoken for many people when he said that this is just winding him up. You know, these stories are coming thick and fast now, and it really demonstrates how farcical our border control system has become. Because as you say, Mark, a key part of working out who an illegal immigrant is, where they've come from, who helped them to get to the UK, what they might plan to do while they're in the UK, a lot of that information will become clear from their phones. It is absolutely a fundamental right, I think, of a democratic nation to take the phones of illegal arrivals to try and work out what the hell they're up to. So the fact that European human rights law is even frustrating that, even preventing us from doing that very basic task, really demonstrates that it's just interfering with our democratic rights as a sovereign nation.
That's right. Many of these illegal immigrants stay in touch with the folk that traffic them here, don't they, for a start?
Oh yes, absolutely. There will be just so much information on those phones that would be useful to the authorities in working out what is going on. You know, smash the gangs, Keir Starmer said about 5,000 times, repeating it on a loop. He hasn't done that. But if you did want to smash the gangs, one thing you would do is seize illegal immigrants' phones and find out who these gangs are. Where are they? What are they saying to each other? It's just preposterous. And, you know, you're absolutely right when you say that it seems like these illegal arrivals have more rights than ordinary Brits. Firstly, if we were to commit a crime, it's very possible our phones would be seized and studied by the police. Also, if we were down on our luck and lost our jobs and couldn't make ends meet, there's no way we could go to the government and say, please put us up in a 4-star hotel, give us 3 meals a day and give us a taxi to the local dentist. They would laugh in your face. So we now face a situation where people who come here illegally have more rights to basic necessities and more rights to privacy than your average Brit who's lived in this country for centuries. It just doesn't make sense.
Most definitely. There are implications, I think, aren't there, Brendan, for our economy, because on these mobile phones will be a potential UK contact who will be saying to an illegal immigrant, here's the car wash where you can work, here's a guy whose house you can stay in, here's somewhere where you can, you know, whatever, just enter the black economy. You've got that element, which is an economic concern. But then you've got national security too, given the fact that the security services of this country are very clear that some of the people that cross the channel may have terror links. Again, key information that could be on their mobile phones.
Oh, unquestionably. They may have actual terror links with organisations, or they may hold views that we decide as a nation are not conducive to the public good. You know, recently an illegal immigrant who came on a boat was seen doing a Nazi salute at one of those anti-Israel protests that have been infecting our cities for the past 2.5 years. Do we want people like that in our country? Do we want people who hold anti-Semitic views, who watch ISIS videos, who share horribly anti-Israel memes on their phones and say, you know, we hate the Jewish state? All this kind of information is likely to be on their phones in the conversations they're having with friends. Either they've got direct links with questionable groups, or they hold views that we have a right as a nation to decide that we don't want in our country. So we are just, you know, we can't do what we need to do, which is to hold to account the people who come here illegally, to say to them, we need to find out who you are, where you come from, so that we can send you back. And the fact that we can't do that, it really just calls into question the idea that we are a properly sovereign nation anymore.
Now, we're looking at £500,000 so far in compensation that's paid out. That's your money, my money, Brendan, and the money of my viewers and listeners. This could run to millions, as others may sue, given that we've got this legal precedent. So this will be very expensive, and a PR coup for those gangsters and criminals who are putting people on the boats, the so-called gangs that you mentioned that Keir Starmer apparently is going to smash. Likely these payouts will be part of the sales pitch on TikTok for future illegal immigrants.
Absolutely. You know, we are now rewarding people who come here illegally. That's what we're doing. We are rewarding them with comfortable hotels. We're rewarding them with food and medical treatment and a home office card that allows them to spend money on whatever they want to buy. And now we're rewarding them with thousands of pounds because we supposedly took their phones illegally. So this is another green light. This is a green light to the gangs. This is a green light to the mostly young men in Calais from places like Eritrea or Afghanistan or wherever else it might be. It's a green light to them to come to the UK. We are a soft touch. We are advertising to the world that we don't take our borders seriously. We don't take our nationhood seriously. We don't take our national rights seriously. So just come on over, take the mick, come into the country. We won't do anything about it. So we are continually sending the signal to these criminal gangs and the men who use the criminal gang services. We're sending them the signal, come here. We won't do anything about it. It's such a lethal message to be sending out.
Well, you're not the only one that takes that view. Here's a voice note from Dan.
Good morning, Mark. It's Dan from Kent. Think of apples. We have red, we have green ones. Now imagine we started importing a different coloured apple from somewhere into our country, and then those apples turned out to be poisonous. Only some though. We don't know what ones they are. They were making our people sick. They were a danger to our communities. We'd stop importing them, or we'd allow them in until we found a way of finding out which ones were the bad apples. But that's no different to illegal immigration. We're allowing all these undocumented men come into our country, and then we allow them to run freely amongst our communities. There's no different.
No different indeed, Dan. Thank you for that. I'm so grateful for these voice notes because they're preserving my mental health, so I'm not on my own and thinking this is complete madness. Jacqueline says, good morning, Mark, and good morning, Brendan. Just a thought, how can these illegal immigrants claim human rights when the majority claim they're not from Europe? I thought it was the European Court of Human Rights. Doesn't the European in the title mean anything? Just a thought from Jackie in Stoke-on-Trent. Well, that would be common sense, Jackie, but we don't have that, do we? This has global implications, this legal framework. Dave says, good morning, Mark. I've worked all my life. I'm 62. If I lose my job, I won't look for another one and sign on. Your guest Linda speaks of an ageing population. How many of those who have never paid in will get a better pension than me? That's Dave in Lancashire. Good morning, Mark, says Alan. UK taxpayer here. I've been paying my taxes since the 80s. Is there any human rights lawyer to help me sue the government for spaffing my taxes on illegal migrants and not the public services that we so desperately need, such as fixing our roads? What about Sam, who says Starmer is so busy patting himself on the back for surviving last week and strutting around like a damn peacock. He's got no understanding of just how fed up we are with him and his shambolic government. Brendan, the Prime Minister does want to remain in number 10. He's clinging to his political life, isn't he? But the bottom line is that this issue about illegal immigration is something that crosses the political spectrum. Do you see any circumstances in which the Prime Minister will act when it comes to ECHR or the boats?
No, absolutely not. I don't think he has either the will to do so or even the cojones or just the basic everyday nous to do something about this problem. You know, Keir Starmer is fundamentally a human rights lawyer who ended up in number 10. He held all these views for a period of time, you know, that we should weaken borders and we should sacralize the rights of these people who come from overseas. That's the bread and butter of his section of society. That's what they think. So whether he has jettisoned those views or still holds them, that is a bit of a mystery to all of us. But, you know, people are so angry about this. And I think the political class are on a hiding to nothing if they don't recognize how angry ordinary people are about this problem. And you know who's most angry? Legal migrants to this country. You know, there are many well-established legal migrant communities in this country. I come from one. My parents are immigrants. They came to London in 1970.
Me too.
I grew up in an immigrant community with people from Indian heritage, Irish heritage, of course, Greeks, Italians. And these were hardworking people who, for the most part, really appreciated the fact that Britain gave them somewhere to live and somewhere to work and somewhere to have their kids educated. Those kinds of communities, I know this from speaking to them, are furious about the small boats issue, our broken borders, the arrival of illegal immigrants, because they know it's casting the whole question of immigration in a dark light. So there is just anger across the country amongst ordinary Brits, amongst legal migrants. People are furious about this issue and it needs to be fixed.
Meanwhile, reform opens the door, Brendan, to a patriotic election pact with the Conservatives if it means keeping a left-wing coalition out of power. What's the story here?
Yeah, this is so interesting because if you look at the headlines, it would seem that Reform and the Tories are just at loggerheads. There's a bitter rivalry between them. And I'm sure there is. There's no love lost between Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch and vice versa. But it seems that Reform might be open to doing a patriotic pact if it came to a situation where Reform didn't get enough seats to form a government. And I don't think they will. A lot can change in the next 2 or 3 years, and I'm quite excited about the Reform project. But it seems unlikely they'll get enough seats to form their own government. So they might go into coalition with the Tories if that would help to keep out a coalition between Labour, the Greens, and all the rest of them. I think that's a good idea. A lot can change in politics in 1 week, never mind 3 years. So we don't know what's going to happen. But I think it is so important to keep this Labour Party out of power. They are worse than useless. And as for the Greens, the Green Party seems to believe in nothing except legalizing dangerous drugs and hating Israel. I mean, what else have they got going for them? It's so important that we block the path to power of those parties. And if that means a pact, then that's what it should be.
$1 million question, though, would this be a pre or post-election pact, Brendan? Because if the right vote is split at the ballot box in the next election, well, then by the day after, the damage is done and a left-wing coalition will have more available seats.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Because that would then allow the left-wing coalition, so-called, to sneak into power by clubbing together quite quickly after the election. I don't know if it would be pre or post-election, and it might not happen at all, of course. There's a lot of frostiness between these two parties. And let's not forget, there is a significant wing of the Conservative Party that would never have anything to do with Nigel Farage. If you think about the old dinosaurs, I don't mean that pejoratively, but the old guard, Thatcher might have referred to them as the wets, the more liberal wing of the Conservative Party. They hate populism. They don't like Nigel Farage. They don't like reform. So it's a big ask, isn't it, for these two parties to get together. But for me, the most exciting thing in British politics at the moment is the rise of reform, because what that speaks to is ordinary people's desire for a radical shake-up of politics as we know it, especially amongst working class communities where they used to vote Labour for decades and decades. Those communities are crying out for something new, and I think that's exciting.
Do you worry, though, that reform risk over-promising and under-delivering? Rupert Lowe, for example, who set up a new political party, Brendan, has said that Nigel Farage will let people down when he becomes Prime Minister, if he does.
I think Rupert Lowe is an interesting character. I think his rape gang inquiry has been so important, and I was really pleased to see Kemi Badenoch engaging with that. It's so he's done great work on that in terms of getting to the heart of what is the greatest post-war scandal. But I don't think Restore Britain, his new party, I don't think it's going to sweep power. I think there's a lot of delusion amongst its supporters. They seem to Rupert Lowe. That's just not going to happen. They really need to get a grip. I do worry that Restore Britain could become almost the Your Party of the right. A little bit cranky, a little bit too out there, appealing to people on the internet, but not necessarily to people in the real world. So I'm not particularly worried about Restore Britain at the moment. I could be proven wrong. I still think that if you talk to ordinary people in the country, the name on their lips is Nigel Farage. They see him as the man who could shake things up. It's possible he'll overpromise and underdeliver, as politicians have done before, but I think people are willing to take a punt on him because of how the other two parties have treated us over the past 15 years.
I mean, when are these headlines going to end, Mark Dolan? Just when you think things are slowing down, it feels like they ramp right back up.
Well, that's right. And the country's chief prosecutor has said no one is above the law, including Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, partly because he's had his royal titles taken. He's no longer Prince Andrew.
Well, for years, Andrew's Epstein ties were mostly a matter of public scrutiny. I mean, we have said, the two of us together, you are who you associate with. And that was enough for us. But now those connections are going to be under formal investigations. Authorities are examining whether his meetings and communications with Jeffrey Epstein could amount to misconduct while acting in an official capacity for the government. If evidence supports it, this could move beyond mere scandal into a criminal inquiry, a serious step for a senior royal and a significant moment for the monarchy.
Well, that's right. There are so many elements to this, aren't there, Kinsey? There are the sexual allegations, the idea that young women were trafficked to the United Kingdom by Epstein for the pleasure of Andrew, allegations that things may have happened on royal turf, including at Buckingham Palace, potentially while Queen Elizabeth was in Balmoral, allegations which Andrew denies, but damaging allegations nonetheless. So you've got that side of it. Then you've got the financial impropriety. And then you have the small matter of national security and the idea that Andrew may be guilty of misconduct in public office, sharing commercially and national insurance-ly sensitive documents abroad.
Well, there's a newly released dossier, and I mean, does it ever end? But it paints a more troubling picture of Andrew's relationship with Epstein, because these emails, they suggest that Andrew allowed Epstein to help arrange meetings during an official trade trip to China. And photos of this trip show Andrew socializing with a Chinese model on that same 2010 visit. So, I think it's fair to assume that perhaps Jeffrey Epstein made an introduction there. The documents also claim that earlier in the year, Andrew shared a confidential Treasury briefing on Iceland's financial crisis with a banker friend, which I think you were alluding to, and passed along messages concerning the taxpayer-owned Royal Bank of Scotland to advisor David Stern, who then, according to the Daily Mail, forwarded them to Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew even attempted to set up a meeting between Epstein and a Libyan dictator at Epstein's request, but the Daily Mail stresses that that meeting ultimately never happened, although Andrew should have never been trying to set up that meeting in the first place.
The issue, we've got Linda Jubilee live in the studio, is that the Andrew allegations, that go beyond sex, go beyond financial impropriety. This is national security. This is somebody whose actions may have actually worked against the interests of the state.
Yes, that's very, very true. And also there is a reason why senior Polish investigative journalists and the Polish authorities are actually taking a look at Epstein's links with Russia and Mandelson's links with Russia, because they think that there is a national security problem here. And Andrew is right in the middle of that mix. Now, the fact of the matter is, Kinsey's outlined some of this, but Andrew Liana makes it clear in his book Entitlement that all the way through, from the time that Prince Andrew was appointed as a trade envoy to the UK, he was continually going on trips early, leaving them late, so that he could furnish his own business interests, allegedly, before and after, doing whatever he's doing, such as it was, for our country. And the fact of the matter is, in the book, in that particular book, alongside the heinous situation with the trafficking of young girls, is the hideous prospect that many millions of pounds of taxpayers' money in this country has been misspent.
And Kinsey, King Charles has run out of levers to pull in relation to his younger brother, hasn't he? He's no longer Duke of York. He doesn't have the membership of the Order of the Garter. He's not Prince Andrew. There's not too much more you can do other than make the guy homeless, living in a tent in a field somewhere. So now King Charles is a passenger in this awful story.
Yeah, well, my suggestion is throw him under the bus. Tell us all, I'm revolted. I'm disgusted by my brother. I had no clue this was going on. I don't even like the guy. Why would I know his schedule? Why would I talk to him? The king has said recently, I will collaborate, I will contribute in any way, shape, or form with law enforcement as they continue to investigate this. I think that that is a great thing, although I do wish the king would, step up and say, I'm as appalled as you are. I'm disgusted. I had no clue, and I'm distancing myself.
Yeah, the problem there is, Kinsey, that I strongly suspect that King Charles did know about some of the things, not all of the things in detail, but he was well aware of his brother's character. And he was known to say to people in the royal household that Andrew was an accident waiting to happen. And that's the issue here. The issue for the monarchy, I believe, is that certain people, dare I say it, the much, much loved late Queen and his brother, King Charles, may have turned a blind eye to some things they should have paid attention to earlier, and it won't do any good now to say, sorry, I don't know anything about this.
That's a great question from, and a point from Linda, isn't it, Kinsey? How much did the King know? How much did the Queen know? Surely they knew that Andrew was a wrong-un.
Well, when we hear about 26-year-old Russians in their stilettos getting a tour of Buckingham Palace after a nightcap with Andrew and tea, you have to ask yourself, how many witnesses were there wondering why this 20-something is skipping along the Buckingham Palace carpets? I mean, I have my own questions. But I also understand that Charles has always hated Andrew, did not give him the time of day, thought he was an imbecile, thought he was just a moron. And so would he know his schedule? Would he even want to know the details of his life? I don't know. I mean, I do think that this is a problem that he inherited, and I apologize to those that this offends, but I put a lot of the blame on the late Queen Elizabeth and her council.
Wow.
Why were they not more aggressive?
Is this the mother of all cover-ups? Linda?
I think Kinsey's right that Andrew was known to be her favourite child, that she permitted, a lot of behaviour that should have perhaps been reprimanded. But the fact of the matter is that the royal household, as you know, works in a way where everyone's diaries match up with everyone else. So everyone knew what Prince Andrew was doing. That's how they know he went on trips as a Royal Trade Envoy early and stayed late, because people were well aware of the details of what he was doing. Certainly the courtiers were.
Standing elite-level journalism, we need to know what's going on in our country. My viewers and listeners are spitting with rage. Some people who get up in the morning, work very hard. I've got a caller earlier. He said he does 50, 60 hours a week. He pays his taxes. He doesn't want it going to compensation for people who have broken the law to get into this country, having their phones taken.
Yeah, you're totally right. And, that's what we're hearing from our readers as well. It's that fundamental breach of fairness. If you go out, if you set your alarm clock early and you put in a hard day's graft, you're being squeezed within an inch of your life. Whereas if you don't do that, either you're on benefits or you're an illegal migrant, then there seems to be, a magic money tree for you. Now, you said that you couldn't make this story up, but the depressing thing is that these sort of stories have become more depressingly routine since the migrant crisis really exploded a few years ago. And the amount of them which some reason implicate the European Convention of Human Rights seems to be becoming all the more common. And I think this story is once again clearly going to open up debate about our membership of the Strasbourg Court, because it clearly now, it was created in the post-war period, but it's just been twisted out of all recognition to essentially become a political tool for activist lawyers to weaponize and subvert the intentions of our sovereign government. And, I think many people are getting fed up with that.
Most definitely. Interesting that Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, Jack, said to me that if we were still in the European Union, we wouldn't have a cat's in chance hell of exiting the ECHR.
Well, no, and despite the two institutions being separate, clearly it's all sort of part of that same sort of, European, collectiveness, which was about supranational organisations imposing their will on nation states. Now, clearly we've had two parties come out, Reform and the Tories, saying they want to leave it. While Keir Starmer is in charge, we are seeing absolutely no, not even, talk about leaving, but just, he's got an attorney general who basically worships at the altar of the ECHR. But the amount of times, even in this government, I've heard that we're going to be cracking down on abuses of Article 8, which is the sort of the right to the family life, which is that one loophole which lawyers tend to be able to weaponize. So far, we haven't seen anything in that direction. Shabana Mahmood is talking a good game, but so far we've seen no action on that front. And I think that, the imperative now to really sort of crack down on judges in the UK misinterpreting Article 8. I mean, clearly, the right to a phone, is not sort of shouldn't be enshrined in Article 8, but because they managed to appeal to this clause, often they manage to get their way by judges. And so I think that we need more movement on this front.
Now, of course, I can caveat all of this, Jack, by saying that there are probably a majority of people that cross the channel, economic migrants trying to have a better life. They're not all rapists, murderers and terrorists, of course not. But the issue we've got, Jack, is that we can't tell the difference between those who are just seeking a better life and others that may harm us. There are so many elements to illegal immigration, aren't there? There is the national security risk, given the fact that the authorities are concerned that a number of people crossing the channel may have terror links. Well-reported stories of attacks on our own citizens, rapes, murders, all the rest of it, truly egregious crimes. So that's a safety issue. But there's the financial cost too, isn't there? Because, for example, this mobile phone compensation thing, this could run into millions. Your paper has pointed out that the 70 boat migrants who have already received this payout, well, it could run to thousands. There's also the cost of accommodating these people, and a good percentage of those that have entered the country illegally will receive asylum, which will likely mean there'll be a cost to the taxpayer for the rest of their lives. The cost is, it's not thousands, it's not millions, it is billions.
Oh yeah, the National Audit Office a few years ago, I think it's last year actually, produced a report which tracked the cost of migrant accommodation, both already spent and projected over a 10-year period, and the total sum was an eye-watering £15 billion.
15 billion.
15 billion, that's just for accommodation alone. And then you're right, you add in the cost of processing their applications, you add in the cost if they have to stay in this country. It is absolutely enormous. And so you have the cold hard cash sum, which I think is incredibly egregious to most working people, but also it is that general fairness argument of people coming over, skipping the queue, and then basically getting, free bed and board. They get Aspen cards, but they have money on that as well. And so it's just this, I think, constant breach of the sort of the idea in our society where, you play by the rules, you work hard, it pays off. And it seems that so many people now are being squeezed, like the number one thing which people write into me about is the cost of living crisis, how they're struggling to make ends meet, but they're still going out to work. And it seems that, I know we're sort of broadening the point a bit, but people that aren't working, people that haven't played by the rules, there's a sense that they're getting everything. Well, if you put in a hard day's graft, you get nothing.
Most definitely. Gary has messaged the show, Jack, and said, good morning, Mark and Jack. I think, just thinking it's $6,500 compensation. How much did the lawyers cost on top of that? Eric in Barnsley, good morning, Mark. Don't forget the figures don't include payments to human rights lawyers who are representing these people. Ban legal aid for illegal immigrants and their lawyer firms. Many people concerned about the gold rush, the industry that is human rights in this country, Jack.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a total cash cow. For lawyers weaponising this. But that is why I think the governments of all stripes, if they're going to put a stop to it. Keir Starmer told our paper about 2 years ago now, when he first came into power, that he would put a stop to the weaponisation of Article 8 claims. And what we've seen is an explosion in these claims in that time. And so, there is now, I think, an imperative for the ministers to really get tough on this, because British voters won't put up for it much longer, and that is why you're seeing, parties like Reform climbing the polls, because they have vowed to just take us out of the ECHR. Now, clearly that is going to be, that's going to be divisive for some people, but at least some sort of bringing into heel of judges who manage to weaponize these claims, and I think it needs to be done.
It definitely needs to be done. Before we let you go, Jack, the PM's been busy lately. Of course, he's fired his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, a bit of a sacrificial lamb there, given the issues he faced. He's removed Sir Chris Wormald after just a year as Cabinet Secretary, normally a post that you stay in for a decade, amid concerns that Britain's most senior civil servant was not delivering. Meanwhile, Jack, we're hearing that the Labour Party, cannot unite around one particular individual to replace Starmer. So are we stuck with Sir Keir for the foreseeable, do you think?
It's a weird paradox, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we've had total and utter unleashed carnage and chaos. I think we're at the only point in living memory where we're without a permanent chief of staff, a permanent director of communications, and a permanent cabinet secretary. But at the same time, we do have this sort of stability because no one can decide in the Labour Party who is the best person to replace Keir Starmer. And so he is in office at the moment by virtue of the fact there is no obvious successor. You know, we don't have a sort of Gordon Brown colossus breathing down the neck of Tony Blair, who was just the obvious candidate to take over. Each of the front runners have their faults. You know, Angela Rayner still hasn't sorted out her HMRC issue, where Streeting is pretty loathed by large members of the grassroots Labour Party. Shabana Mahmood is liked by members of the public, but obviously that makes her not very popular with members of her own party who don't like the immigration crackdown. You know, Ed Miliband can't really do it again because I think even he knows that a second stint would just be, constitutionally pretty improper if he became Prime Minister, having been rejected by the British people.
Wow,
and so
good point.
And so there's no one really there at the moment who is the complete package. And therefore, and also none of them want to come into government. And the first thing they do is lose a pretty bloody May local elections, which would almost be their first act in government. And so by virtue of the fact there's no one to replace Keir Starmer, he's safe for now.
Meanwhile, briefly, the Prime Minister is facing demands to actually cut funding to Labour Together, the think tank previously run by Morgan McSweeney, because of concerns that they were seeking to discredit UK journalists, including a few people working at the Times newspaper.
It's an absolutely shocking story. You know, Gabriel Prockrand and Harry York, who really sort of blew the lid on dodgy donations at Labour Together a few years ago, we now realise that Labour Together, you know, the think tank which is most aligned with the Starmer project, helped get him elected. Morgan McSweeney used to run it. It used to be run by a current Cabinet Office Minister, Josh Simons, as well. And when he was there, he commissioned these private investigators to essentially try and dig up dirt and then disseminate totally incorrect smears about these two journalists, you know, questioning their faith, questioning their political motivations, you know, really nasty, but also totally baseless stuff.
Yeah, fake news
totally.
linked to Russia, for example.
Totally, just totally like
Oh, and by the way,
stuff.
some of it, I would argue, with an anti-Semitic flavour.
Well, it definitely seemed that way. And I think that, you know, rightly, the Sunday Times have come out, defended their journalism. And I'm glad that yesterday they put this story on the front page. And I hope that Labour ministers now come out and distance themselves and probably will end up cutting ties with Labour Together.
Britain's chief prosecutor has said no one is above the law, including Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Let's get reaction now from a legend of royal broadcasting and journalism, Dickie Arbiter, former press secretary to Queen Elizabeth II. Dickie, good morning. Welcome to Talk.
Morning, Mark.
Very good to see you. A fresh headache for the King and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. It's not impossible that the King's younger brother could be imprisoned.
It's not impossible, but police need to first investigate, and they seem to be dragging their heels. They are assessing. What are they assessing? Are they assessing Andrew's involvement in Epstein and Maxwell's trafficking? Or are they assessing Andrew's handing over of not necessarily secret documents, but confidential documents? Or are they assessing both? They've got to get on with it, because I think people are getting heartily sick and tired of the authorities dragging their heels.
Given the weight of evidence now at the door of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, Dickie, are his protestations of innocence becoming less and less credible by the day?
Oh, I think they became less and less credible after that 2019 Newsnight interview. The proof was there in the photograph, which he denied ever having been taken. But Maxwell has crawled out of a jail cell and said in an email that it is genuine. I think Andrew has got to step forward and say exactly what happened. He can't continue hiding behind the veil of monarchy, because he's no longer part of that institution. He's plain Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and he needs to get on with it and let other people get on with their jobs instead of this dragging out on and on and on, and also bringing the monarchy into a state of disrepute.
Who should Andrew Mountbatten Windsor be fessing up to, or at least sharing what information he has, Dickie? Would it be US Congress or the UK authorities, or both?
I think it's a question of both. The Americans have wanted to interview him and talk to him since that ghastly 2019 interview. And here we are 7 years on, and still nothing from him. He also needs to talk to British authorities. So it's a question of talking to both of them. I see in Pam Bondi on your screens at the moment, and papers that have been released. There's a whole list in one of the newspapers of over 300 names of people allegedly associated with Jeffrey Epstein. And you've got to question that list, because you've got people like Janis Joplin, where Epstein was 17 when she died. Elvis Presley, he was 22 when he died. What are these people doing on the list? And you've got to ask yourself, what are a lot of people doing on that list? So Andrew's got to step forward. He's got to talk to the British authorities, because they'll want to question him if the police are serious about their investigation. And he also needs to talk to the American authorities.
Well, of course, as you know, Dickie, if you're on that list, it doesn't necessarily implicate you in any crimes, but it's still worthy of investigation. We need to get to the truth, don't we? Is the risk of an Andrew Mountbatten Windsor appearance at US Congress that it would be like the Newsnight interview times 100?
That's the problem with Andrew. He's not the most intelligent bunny on the planet, and he's not very good at talking on his feet. And when we saw that in the Newsnight interview, he took his time in answering questions, and when he answered them, he fudged every answer. So he's not the best of people to put up before inquisitors. And the Americans are dab hands at tearing people to shreds. And I think that's one of the reasons why, when he initially said a few years ago he's quite prepared to stand up in court, his lawyers probably stopped him and said, no, you can't do it because you're not capable of doing it. So it's a bit of chicken and egg here. That will he stand up and be judged? That is for him to decide. Will the Americans want him? Yes, of course they will. Will the British authorities want him? Yes, they will. Will they tear him to shreds? Probably.
We've had statements from the King and from the Prince and Princess of Wales, Dickie. Is it time for King Charles to address the nation on this one?
That's a very difficult one. We've seen in the past, on very rare occasions, the late Queen addressing the nation, particularly when Diana, Princess of Wales, died. She paid tremendous tribute on the eve of the funeral. We saw the late Queen again in April 21 at the time, no, April 20, at the time of COVID, where she quoted that from Vera Lynn's song, we'll see our friends again, we'll see our family again, we'll meet again. It's a very difficult one, given that there is a police investigation. He has said that he and Buckingham Palace and the royal family will cooperate with any police investigation, and that they will, and they will open up anything that the police want to see. But to actually address the nation, you've got to ask yourself, what does he say short of actually meddling with the police investigation? It's a very difficult call. And I think at the moment, he said that all he needs to say, and people have got to accept that until such time that there is something to say, and until such time the police start their investigation and have even completed it.
You are a former press secretary to Queen Elizabeth II. What would she be making of this drama, this scandal, this crisis, if she were with us today, Dickie?
She would be absolutely horrified. She probably got an inkling of it immediately after that Newsnight interview, when the headlines were full of Andrew and the Epstein Association and sex trafficking. By that time, she was in her 90s, and she was coming to the end of her life. And it was very unfortunate that she was faced with that from one of her own children. People say that Andrew was her favourite. They were all favourites in different ways, but Andrew managed to get around her. He was never honest with her. He was never honest with anybody, as we saw again, sorry to repeat myself, in that Newsnight interview. So she would have, it would have been, dare I say, the final nail in the coffin in terms of relationship with her son.
You've said that Andrew was not the brightest tool in the box, Dickie. Having witnessed Andrew as Prince Andrew, formerly, given that you were press secretary to the Queen, have these allegations against Andrew surprised you, or was it to type based upon your experience?
Well, it's not surprised me, and it's a bit to type, because Andrew has and did have a reputation, probably still has a reputation. That's why he hasn't said anything, of being arrogant and bombastic and rude. You name it, he is it. I'm not surprised any of this at all. He thought that like a lot of MPs, that he was untouchable. You know, we had the MPs' expenses scandal all those years ago. They thought they were untouchable. Certain members of the royal family, not all of them, but certainly Andrew, thinks he's untouchable. I think the others are very sensible and know that they're not untouchable. They know that they're on a tightrope, and the monarchy can go either way. In relation to what the people want. At the moment, people are happy with a monarchy. It is teetering on the edge of that tightrope, but at the moment, the monarchy is reasonably secure. It just has one bad apple in the basket. That basket has been removed from the centre of monarchy, and that basket has now got to be emptied, and he's got to stand up and be counted.
I will tell you, Dickie, that a couple of my callers and texters and Daniel leaving a voice note has suggested that the King should step in. Very concerned about the direction of the country, illegal immigration, this crisis around Andrew. They'd like to see a more proactive and engaged monarch. Take a listen to this voice note from Daniel.
Good morning, Mark. It's Daniel from Epsom here. I've written to Prince William and I've said to him, William, unless you get involved over the immigration crisis that we're suffering in Britain at the moment, your son George will end up reigning over a third world toilet where all the actual native British people have left. What will you be reigning over? Nothing. Like Mad Max territory. Like be completely third world from floor to ceiling. They need to get involved and speak for the British majority now, before it's too late.
And of course, Dickie, the King will have seen the front page of the Sun newspaper, exclusive asylum fast, 500k phone compo for migrants. At what point does the King or does the Prince of Wales become so concerned about the direction of the country that they step in?
It's a very interesting point, and your caller, I actually had logged on into the station and heard that call. It's a very difficult one in that the last time a constitutional monarch interfered with Parliament and with political business, he had his head disconnected from his shoulders. We're talking about Charles I in 1649. Constitutionally, the monarch is not allowed to interfere in politics. He's not allowed to express a political opinion. The King, when he was Prince of Wales, sailed very close to the wind in terms of political expression. He got away with it because he wasn't the King, he wasn't the sovereign, he was Prince of Wales. But the sovereign cannot do that, and Parliament will make sure that he doesn't do that. So, you know, with due respect to all your viewers, please don't expect too much of the King at the moment, because he is just not allowed to. Government were not allowed to. It doesn't matter what government is in power, what party is in power, he's just constitutionally not allowed to tread that political line.
What about dissolving Parliament and provoking a snap election, Dickie?
Yeah, well, we had that with Boris Johnson, didn't we, when he was trying to delay a debate on Brexit. It didn't work then. He can't just step in and prorogue Parliament. He has to take the advice of his Prime Minister. That's the only way he can act. If he acts arbitrarily, he might well not in 2026. In 1649, if he'd done it, he would have had his second head disconnected from his shoulder. He can't do it. It has to be on the advice of the Prime Minister, and that ain't coming anytime soon.
And does the King need to look at this? Who better to ask than the man whose book, entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York, was the beginning of the end for Andrew. Andrew Lowney. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning.
It will shock many of my viewers and listeners that Andrew remains in line to the throne.
Yes, I mean, it's very difficult to remove it. He has to get permission, I think, of members of the Commonwealth. I think it's very unlikely that case will happen. So it seems to me a slight distraction. I think the focus should be on the police now bringing charges against him for sex trafficking and for misconduct in public office. It's very clear that he has committed this crime, I think. They're investigating Mandelson, so why not Andrew? I think that's a much more important focus. And also a parliamentary committee to look at his time as a trade envoy, because he was enabled and protected by a whole host of people, from former heads of UKTI and former foreign secretaries through to his own staff. And I think the other question is, what did the palace know? When did they know it? And what did they do about it? They claim they're cooperating with police, but all the information I'm getting is that they have actually tried to suppress the story.
So are you implying that the palace, the firm themselves, led by King Charles, may be responsible for a cover-up in relation to Andrew's behaviour?
Absolutely. Journalists who raised the story over the years the stories were denied. Then they would have legal action. Then there were strong-arm tactics, refusing to give access to the royal family for interviews. I know scores of people who complained and were sent away with a flea in their ear. And so I think, that's, if they want to cooperate, then I think they have to make that very clear. I mean, I've seen, for example, one of the policemen at Northgate, Paul Page, has had letters reminding him of his obligations of confidentiality. Well, it's these people who could actually produce the evidence to show whether, for example, Andrew came back to Buckingham Palace the night that Giuffre claimed to have seen him or not. But I think there's a big case here. Ambassadors clearly were allowing Andrew to operate on his own behalf on these trade trips with Jeffrey Epstein, David Rowland, etc. And I think they need to be held to account. I mean, this is a huge, huge cover-up, and it's only going to get bigger.
And if this cover-up had happened within the palace, would that have been on the watch of King Charles or the late Queen Elizabeth II, or both?
Both. And I think, there are big questions about actually who contributed to the hush money for Virginia Giuffre. The King has denied it. My information and that from other newspapers is that, in fact, he contributed. So this is all part of trying to shut this story down.
Is it also your view, therefore, by definition, if you allege there was a cover-up on the part of the palace, that they knew what Andrew was like and what he was up to?
Absolutely. And I mean, they've known for years. I mean, he has been a problem since he was a child.
Well, did they know for years that he was a little bit libidinous man that enjoyed the company of women? Because that might be a reasonable defence, that he was the aforementioned Randy Andy. Are you suggesting that what they knew went beyond the fact that he was a playboy?
Oh, yes. I mean, I've got stories of him being allowed by a housemistress at Gordonston after he left to go and sit on the beds of the young girls there.
That is an extraordinary revelation, that he was allowed to indulge in inappropriate behaviour where he would enter a girls' dormitory and sit on a girl's bed.
Yep.
And his mother, the Queen, will have known about that.
Well, I would have thought so. I mean, I would have thought it was known by the authorities at Gordonston.
And what does that anecdote tell us about Andrew's nature?
Well, I think it confirms some of the concerns people have had. I mean, some of these girls that have been trafficked have been a lot younger than 16. And certainly I've got information which I wasn't able to put in the book for legal reasons of young girls being presented to Andrew. So this isn't a story of Virginia Giuffre being 18. As I say, this story can only get bigger as more details emerge.
So you're implying that notwithstanding allegations of sex trafficking, intimate relations with women on royal property, including potentially Buckingham Palace, but you couldn't rule out, Andrew, given your lengthy research into Andrew and his life, that he had relations with legal minors?
That's certainly the information I've been gathering, yes.
And that would clearly be a criminal offence.
Yes, I think there are several charges. I mean, we even had the Misconduct Public Office telling his protection officer to try and find out information about Virginia Giuffre. I mean, I presented a lot of this information in my book. A lot of what's coming out now isn't new, it's there. But nothing was done. That was August. These stories have been appearing in the press for years about his abuse of his position as a trade envoy, and yet nothing was done. One has to ask why.
One has to ask why. Now, it's very clear that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor denies all of the allegations. If, however, your concerns are validated, Andrew, we could have a scenario where the King's younger brother is prosecuted for being a paedophile.
Well, I think, we can collect the evidence. I mean, it's certainly the information I've been gathering, and I've done this now for 5 or 6 years. And, I've been gratified to see that a lot of things I said in August and was vilified for have proved to be true.
What chance of justice being served if there are victims out there who have been suffered at the hands of Andrew? What are the implications for the monarchy and its survival if Andrew is prosecuted and jailed for these crimes?
Well, I think as long as they address it, as long as they feel that he's not above the law, I think then trust in the institution can be restored. But if there's a sense that there's a cover-up and that they've been complicit in criminal behaviour, then I think they're in difficulties.
Well, that's absolutely right. And by the way, are you convinced by the country's chief prosecutor that no one is above the law, including Andrew? Does he mean it, or is that just warm words?
Well, I hope he means it. You know, lots and lots of people are beginning to call for an investigation and for the Met Police to press charges. We haven't heard anything from Mark Rowley, the Commissioner of Police. I hope that they're taking their time because they want to get their ducks in a row. But I'm a little worried that this has been kicked into the grass as it has for the last 5 or 6 years.
Will King Charles ever speak to his brother again?
I don't know. I don't know what they do, but I do think King Charles needs to be very clear that he will cooperate, allow his staff to give statements to the police and provide all the internal correspondence, all the complaints that were made about Andrew, all the material the police need to mount a proper investigation.
If Andrew is not prosecuted, but further evidence of a royal cover-up at the palace emerge, what is the threat to the monarchy under those circumstances?
Well, I think it's very serious. You know, I think then people will be calling for a clean sweep. I don't think William is in any way implicated in this scandal. And I think there'll be growing calls for the king to step down.
This is remarkable. So, notwithstanding whether Andrew is jailed for any alleged crimes or prosecuted, there's enough there by way of an alleged cover-up to which you believe there is evidence that the king falls, that he must abdicate early in that scenario and William becomes king.
I think there's been a perversion of the Court of Justice by the palace, yes.
My goodness, and therefore with the king at the head of that, he would be responsible. Under those circumstances, he would have to go, Andrew.
Well, I think, you know, there is mounting public anger. I mean, he earned some respect when he was seemed to behave much more ruthlessly towards his brother, and he seems to pull back from that. You know, this is a huge crisis. I mean, far bigger than the abdication, which I've written about. And yet the palace don't seem to understand that. They seem to think they can work in the same old ways of just hoping the problem will pass, but it's not going to.
And what about the deal between the king and Andrew to accommodate the former Duke of York, Andrew, free of charge on the Sandringham estate for the rest of his life? You spoke to me on this programme just 2 weeks ago and you said that wasn't tenable. Is it even less tenable now?
Yes, I mean, I think that Andrew needs to be investigated and bailed very quickly because I think he's a flight risk. I think there's a very good chance he's going to disappear to the Middle East, to somewhere where there isn't an extradition treaty, and rather like the King Juan Carlos of Spain, spend his days in a sunny clime for shady people.
You think it's possible that Andrew may flee the country?
Yes, I think that's a very strong possibility if he feels charges are about to be pressed. The last thing the royal family want is a trial with all their dirty linen aired in public.
You must feel very vindicated that you wrote that book last year. Well, of course, it was several years in the making, wasn't it, Andrew? Entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. You must feel vindicated. It's been a great talking point, your book, but it's been the beginning of the end for Andrew and may prove to be an significant historic document.
Well, I mean, it's always, you know, one writes books hoping one can effect some sort of change, shift the dial, I call it. I've certainly loosened the earth, and I think it emboldened others to perhaps investigate this. I mean, clearly the Epstein leaks have really helped. But yes, it is gratifying to see that my research has been confirmed by the new releases, because a lot of people didn't believe it and tried to dismiss me as a gossip monger and not as a serious person. But yes, you know, there has been, I would say, corruption at the centre of the royal family, and I think for the sake of the institution, it needs to be rooted out. And
worth noting that you were essentially you had pressure from lawyers acting on behalf of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and Sarah Ferguson, making it more difficult for you to write that book. Did you have any pushback from any figures within the actual Buckingham Palace setup and the firm in the writing of your book?
Not that I'm aware of, but I mean, we were very careful. I mean, it was a lot of material was taken out for legal reasons. I had a lot of material, for example, on Mandelson, that whole story, the Islamic Bank with Epstein and Andrew. So We were very careful, but I will be adding this material now to future editions.
I have news that a group of Chagossians have now landed on one of the Chagos Islands, and they will be refusing to leave until the military literally take them off.
Now, this is remarkable because they were taken off the island some time ago.
Yeah.
Against their wishes. A majority of the Chagossian people, I understand, do not want this sell-off to happen, do they?
So this group of Chagossians are British Chagossians. They've been travelling for the past few weeks now.
They've not been consulted, by the way, the Chagossian people, have they?
No, not by government officially, no. So we've done various polling with Chagossians, and we found that the British Chagossian groups, which are about 4,000, 5,000, there's about 8,000, 10,000 in total, wish to remain British, and they want the Chagos Islands to remain under British sovereignty and protect the base. So they want to resettle on the outer islands whilst maintaining the military base. They understand that it all needs protecting. And by having a settled Chagossian population there, it then brings in self-determination, which means they're protected by UN law, which means the whole territory cannot be disputed in any court.
Yeah.
So this is very symbolic.
So then
now.
you'd have the double whammy. You'd have the local population that say this is our home and we're staying. You would have the military exemption. Case closed. We keep the Chagos.
I mean, it's already been case closed since forever anyway.
Yeah.
But this is now further confirmation on that.
So now that's an interesting development. So, because am I mistaken in thinking that the Chagossians have already vacated the islands?
So they were evicted from the islands back in the 1960s.
Right.
They weren't meant to be taken off. The Americans said they can stay on the outer islands, but they had to be taken off Diego Garcia, but the UK government said, we will take them all off anyway. So private security company took them off the islands. It was a very traumatic moment for Chagossians.
For sure.
And they were put onto boats, their pets were shot and burnt alive. It was very, very traumatic for them. Their houses were destroyed. And then most of them came to the UK. And that's why most of them live in Crawley by Gatwick Airport, and the others were sent to the Maldives and Mauritius.
Extraordinary treatment. So a number of Chagossians, British Chagossians, have now they're going to the island, or have they? Or one of the islands, or have
they landed a few hours ago.
Okay, now this is, and why is this so significant?
This is significant because they're now on the islands, and you know their government in exile is Misley Mandarin. He's leading the government in exile as the interim first minister. His group have now landed on the islands.
And is he part of that group?
Yeah, he's the leader of the group.
Wow.
So they will be refusing to leave the islands that they have now landed on, and they can claim squatters' rights now. Yeah,
they most definitely can, and that'll be a significant personal sacrifice to them. Do we know what sort of numbers have flown over?
It's a very small group. I believe.
Handful of people.
Yeah, handful of people. I'm just trying to get more information on it right now. I've got a press release in front of me.
Yeah. Well, while you're talking, I mean, let's just bring people up to speed on what we've heard so far from Robert Midgley, Head of Communications at Friends of the British Overseas Territories. His argument is that the government's position on Chagos and why it had to happen, this massive giveaway of our sovereignty at a cost of billions to you and I, is because there was no legal way around it. Basically, you would be caught up in all sorts of lawfare for years to come if we didn't do a deal. Well, in fact, the argument propounded by Robert Midgley is that there is a exemption on the military basis, the military role of these islands, which gives us exemption. And of course, if the Chagossians return to their homeland, then they will also have rights, given that they would have self-determination. You won't get them out. So this is quite extraordinary. It's a Talk Breakfast exclusive. And it's hard, isn't it, Robert, to understand why the government have done this. Now, you've suggested that if it wasn't required legally and that there were exemptions, that this is ideological. What would that ideology be?
Look, I think this is some sort of socialist, ideological, we want to decolonise the world kind of thing.
Oh, it's an apology for our terrible history.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, is that the same history where we gave the world representative democracy, free speech, open markets, ended slavery and the rule of law?
Yeah,
is that the same terrible Britain?
Don't forget the Chagossians are direct descendants of slaves, and they've been treated terribly. Like, they've been living in the UK, they've been bullied in Mauritius. They've had a law against them in Mauritius, which meant 10 years in prison if they were to define themselves as British Chagossians.
These are the lovely Mauritians that we're giving the Chagos Islands to.
Yeah.
Mauritius, which, by the way, is a country that is a close economic ally of China, no less.
Yeah, and so one of their ports in Mauritius has been directly invested by China. They have lots of projects going on where there's like a smart hub going on in Mauritius that's also paid by China. If you look at a map of all the Chinese investments and ports down in East Africa, you'll see a nice line of Chinese direct investment from the Belt and Road Initiative. It doesn't take a genius to work out that China's hands are all over this, and there's absolutely no surprise that Mauritius has been trying to claim this for the past 20, 30 years.
Now, the clock's against us. We're going to power through a couple of other issues. Are there any political parties behind this protest by the British Chagossians that have landed in their home?
Reform have sponsored the whole thing.
So they paid for it? They paid for the flights?
They paid for it. The person on the ground is Adam Holloway, who's a former MP. And they set off around the 27th of January, I believe. And at that point, I was actually in DC lobbying all the State Department and the White House and all of this, and senators. So it's a bit of a two-pronged approach going along.
Well, I've got three more quick questions before you go. First of all, do the Tories deserve some culpability here, some blame, given that it was, I understand, James Cleverly that opened negotiations with Mauritius over the Chagos Island?
Look, in their defence, they stalled it as much as they could. They didn't pass the bill through. They didn't even start the bill. They clung on to negotiations, and they've been very supportive of us for the past few months.
So you don't think if the Tories were still in power, they'd be doing this?
I think they probably would, and we would be up against the same sort of opposition right now. But we are where we are, and we will fight it.
What does that tell us about the difference between, let's say, the Conservatives and Reform, if you think that the Conservatives in power would ultimately have relented?
Look, I think that no matter who is in...
Damning, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. But the thing is that these two parties are from the same head. No matter who is in charge, they will just continue that government agenda, because we have a problem where civil servants are driving this through. I know civil servants have been bragging about giving away the Chagos Islands for years, that they've suddenly got all this power that they can sign this off to Mauritius.
It's the same civil servants that were so enthusiastic about lockdowns and Sage enforced Boris's hand. Same civil servants who told the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister at the time that we needed the Boris wave.
You know, I'm fully on the side that there's a deep state issue against this.
Wow, and then two more quick ones. Donald Trump, will he change his mind about supporting the Chagos deal?
Look, he's already changed his mind.
Disappointing, wasn't it, when he folded?
No, not at all, to be honest, because we spoke to the State Department a few hours before, and they said, look, we're against the deal, but we have to be diplomatic about this. So therefore, we will put out a statement that says diplomatically, we're against it, but we'll go with you. But they specifically said to us, look, you have to sort it out from the inside.
So Washington might get behind, and then that's my last question, can this be stopped?
Of course it can be stopped, Mark.
Will it be?
I hope so.
In this letter, when it's implied that the government and the Prime Minister are not being honest about military spending, how so?
Well, they constantly talk about the need to reach 3.5% and the fact they have spending plans that they'd love to enact. What they never mention is that they mean enacted at some unspecified point in the future. There's no timeline to this. There's no solid commitment on building our way up to the defences that we need for the country. And they're being disingenuous when they don't give us a timeline and don't tell us when this is going to happen. And the reason it's disingenuous is because we need it now.
And whether it's 2% of GDP, 2.5% or 3%, that's not much good, Andrew, when the economy is effectively shrinking.
Correct. And it's a really difficult situation, and there are difficult decisions to be made. But I would actually put this increase in spending to you as a savings measure, because war is incredibly expensive, as Ukraine will show, the billions of pounds and dollars that have been needed to keep Ukraine in that fight. And the single best way of preventing war is by having a strong defensive deterrent. And that's what we need right now. We need a navy that can protect our waters. We need the ammunition and artillery to give our troops the punch they need should things come. But hopefully, with a proper level of defence spending, it won't come.
And we have a looming unemployment crisis. Military investment is brilliant for the economy and contains within it many thousands of jobs.
Well, exactly this. I'm currently speaking to you from Israel, which knows a thing or two about the need for defense spending and strong defenses. And their economy grew 7% during the recent war they've just had. The existential war of national survival they've just had caused their economy to grow. So this is, investing in our own defenses and our own procurement cycles and mechanisms.
Well,
and
it's
arms
because
factories is great.
it's staffing, it's manufacturing, it's everything.
Yeah, you've got it. This is actually a really good way to make British jobs, and at the same time makes Britain a stronger country and a country less likely to have to send its troops to war.
Is it unfair to lay this at the door exclusively of the Prime Minister? Have we seen this neglect of our military over decades, including under the Conservatives?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And, I was serving in the army around the time of George Osborne, and I saw a number of my peers being given involuntary redundancies as the army was shrunk down to, frankly, an unsustainable level. And the army's been struggling to keep up ever since. And I know from my friends in other services that is replicated across the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy.
The difficult question, I suppose, for anyone that's a signatory to this letter is out of which departmental budgets do you find this money? Because you'll agree, Andrew, that we can't borrow anymore, so we'll have to take it from the pot that's available. Does the money for defence come out of the NHS budget, schools, policing?
It's a great question, and I think we could all point to areas where our government is spending money that we're not entirely comfortable with. Luxury hotels for people who arrive on dinghies would be the very obvious one that springs to mind. But that's nowhere near enough to get us to the level of spending that we need. But the point is, if you take money from somewhere else temporarily to fund defence manufacture, defence procurement, that money is going to make its way back to the economy and make its way back to the government. And it's going to actually be an investment in the long run. That's why the Americans are so keen for people to buy their defense products, because it invests billions and billions of dollars into the US economy. This is not a question of taking money from somewhere else. It's a question of potentially making money further down the line.
Are the signatories to this letter not a bunch of warmongers?
Well, I'm one of the signatories, and I'd be very keen not to see the UK go to war. And I return to my earlier point. Deterrence is the single best thing that we can have to prevent our troops from ever having to fight. People do not attack strong enemies. And if we are, a strong player on the world stage, if we are able to help our European allies be stronger by selling them some of these arms and ammunition that we're making, we're actually making the whole continent safer. So it's the opposite of being a warmonger.
Would you welcome some of the young people who are struggling to get jobs at the moment? Youth unemployment now, unfortunately, Andrew, the highest in Europe, which is a shocking moment for the country. Would you welcome young people into the military? Should we do more to attract young people to join the forces?
Well, look, the armed forces is an incredible career. And it is not only very exciting where you get to do some incredibly cool stuff, but on top of that, it gives you life skills and it gives you the ability to go out from your time in the army and then move on to other far more successful careers than you would have had if you hadn't joined the army. So I would encourage any young person to get involved with the military, because I had a fantastic 16 years. And I know my soldiers have gone on to really great things, and it can be a real boost for the rest of your life.
Well, Tony has messaged the programme, Andrew, and says, good morning, Mark. Get the work-shy, feckless, anxious youth on benefits into the armed forces. Two options: work or join the military. No get out. Turn benefits into defence spending by either sending them or, as I think is more likely, they miraculously overcome their anxiety or other spurious issues to make it into a regular job. Tony, thank you for that. It doesn't help, though, does it? If you're looking to have military recruitment, Andrew, if those who have served in the forces in the past are being prosecuted for doing their job, for example, in Northern Ireland during the Troubles.
Yeah, and we're seeing some egregious examples of that. And if we're talking about the British defences and how they behave on operations, they absolutely should be held accountable if they break the law. That's what sets us apart from other armies and other countries, is that we retain our morality when we go on operations. But doing it after 50 years is an absolute travesty of justice. Nobody's going to remember things accurately. Nobody's going to be able to give testimony that is meaningful after 50 years. And this hounding of our Northern Ireland veterans is absolutely atrocious.
Andrew, why does Sir Keir Starmer's plan to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius at an enormous cost, why does it matter to my viewers and listeners?
Because the Chagos Islands being British makes us safer. There are significant security threats in that region of the world, from China above all, and having a base there that we can use to forward mount aircraft and other naval vessels is really important to enable us to project our force around the world. And on top of that, the Americans are clearly a little bit unwilling to be partners with the UK at the moment. And having the Chagos Islands is a really great way of bringing us closer to the Americans, the single strongest military on earth. And again, one of the best things that could possibly deter war and stop us having to send our young men and women to fight.
Now, we know that the president has run a little hot and cold on this Chagos deal, but speaking on Truth Social in the last 24 hours, he's blasted the deal and has urged the Prime Minister to row back on this plan. What chances are there that the Prime Minister will think again, or is this a done deal, do you think, Andrew?
Well, Mark, I think this is looking increasingly likely that he's certainly going to reconsider. He's getting criticism from not only within the UK, but now our strongest and formerly most reliable partner has really given both barrels to Mr. Starmer. So I think every day that goes by with this level of criticism hopefully gives us the chance to reverse this ridiculous decision to hand over the Chagos and pay for the privilege of doing so.
Andrew, can you tell us about your brilliant podcast? Because it's a must listen, and I think my viewers and listeners would enjoy it.
Thank you very much. It's called The Brink. It's with former Daily Telegraph writer and Jewish Chronicle editor Jake Wallace-Simons. And what we try to do is look at how our society can bring itself back from where it is. It's about getting rid of this down with us mentality that we have in the UK and finding positive voices from across the political spectrum who can give us ideas and conversations about how the UK reinvents itself and pulls itself back from the brink of where we are right now.
Former royal editor of the Sun newspaper. Charlie, where to start? Andrew is back on the Sandringham estate, but it's not impossible that at some point he'll be accommodated in His Majesty's prison.
Absolutely, Mark. It depends how this police investigation goes and what they discover, and if in fact he is charged and faces a trial. Now, if he does that and is found guilty, then he could face actually life in prison, which would be, well, everything. If we open up the pages of any newspaper, listen to any news program at all, everything's sensational on that day. Sensational today, and that will be equally a sensational day as well.
Most definitely. I've got to draw your attention to a developing story, Charlie. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but I'll describe it. It's the respected US media site TMZ, who have just released photos, we assume, from the cache of documents from the latest Epstein files release. This is a photograph, if you can see your screen at the moment,
yes,
and I'll describe it to those listening on the radio. Andrew on all fours on a rug, we understand, in the Royal Lodge on the Windsor estate, with a small child, could be his grandchild, we don't know. But Andrew's playing with this kid, no problem, no suggestion of criminal activity there at all, except that the child is in possession of a ball that is a direct mock-up of a human breast, a wildly inappropriate toy for a child to be in possession of. What do you make of this image?
Well, if that is the case, then it is completely inappropriate. But I mean, as others have said this morning, we have to be careful on all these sort of things. There's going to be an awful lot of photographs released, and we have to look at the context of it. Now, this was taken at Royal Lodge, so it's more than likely that child, who's about a year, 18 months old, is likely to be one of his grandchildren.
Yeah.
And he's, like many grandparents, is on all fours and playing with them. The question of the ball is, I think, as others have said as well, is open to interpretation. I'm not disputing that it may be in the shape of a breast. If it is, it's quite appalling. But it could be, as one of your other guests said, it could be a deflated balloon.
I do agree with you fully about, keeping one's counsel on this until we have more detail and more context. But there are other images that are on this website, which is TMZ, which is a respected US outlet, whereby it's very clearly an absolute replica of a human breast, of a female breast. And you just wonder, don't you, about Andrew's judgment something that you've called into doubt for many years now, Charlie?
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. If that is the case, then what on earth was he thinking of it all, playing with that sort of ball-shaped breast? It's quite ridiculous. But then again, this is a man who hasn't got any taste or moral compass at all, to be perfectly honest.
Charlie, what's your appraisal of the King's handling of this so far? We had a statement yesterday. I think there's not much more he can do at the moment. But has he been slow to act? I mean, let's not forget, Charlie, that it was 2020 when the Queen reportedly wrote that cheque for £12 million to Andrew's sex accuser, Virginia Giuffre. At that point, why didn't he lose the Duke of York title? Why didn't he cease to be Prince Andrew, particularly once Charles took to the throne?
Because I'm assuming that because Andrew will have told the Queen and the now King at that time that these allegations, as he has continued to say all the time, were not true, and he is fighting them. You're absolutely right. It goes back to 2020, but there is no investigation at the moment that's going on about those allegations involving the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. What we're talking about now is misconduct in public office, which is equally a serious offence. And I have to say, I still think there should be still some investigation into the allegations of trafficking of these women. But we're dealing with something else which is much more recent. Now, I think the King has done very well so far. There is not much else. He's not responsible for the prosecution. He can only be responsible for what he's already done. He's removed Andrew from Royal Lodge. He's now in exile in Sandringham. He's not got any of his royal titles or any of his paraphernalia anymore. What else can the King do? And I have to say that this story is probably one of the top 10 best royal stories of modern times, to be perfectly honest. And it's going to run and run. It's going to. I often think of the royal family as a modern day living soap opera, and this is one of the greatest events that's happening in it. And I'm afraid that the King and the rest of the royal family are going to have to live with the tainting of the royal family, which it's tainted, and people will still continue to ask questions, as you have done this morning, quite rightly so. What did he know? When did he know? And, why has he not done any more? He can't do any more.
Police are searching the Royal Lodge in Windsor for a second day. Now, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was released under investigation after arrest for misconduct in public office. That happened yesterday on his 66th birthday. Well, the police searches are ongoing today with cops at the Royal Lodge in Windsor. Of course, this is a sprawling property boasting 30 rooms. Andrew had a lengthy lease there but was forced to leave following further revelations in the context of the Epstein files. Well, cops are back in the Royal Lodge. They're going through computers, they're going through drawers, they're looking at documents, and this is very much an active investigation. Let's get further reaction from Norman Baker, the author of And What Do You Do? What the Royal Family Don't Want You to Know. Norman Baker, of course, is also a former Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament. Good morning, Norman.
Morning, Mark.
What's your reaction to the events of the last 24 hours? Are you surprised at how this has played out?
Not entirely. I mean, there was a huge amount of public pressure which was building up, indeed from the media as well, to try and do something. The Daily Mail ran a headline saying, when are the police going to do something? So I think they have finally done something. They've been reluctant over many years to engage with allegations against the royal family, but they've finally been forced to do so. I think the reason that Andrew was arrested, as opposed to being interviewed under caution, which was the alternative strategy, is that the arrest allows the police to have a warrant to search the property. And quite clearly what they're doing is looking for evidence at both Royal Lodge and indeed up in Norfolk.
Is the damage to the royal brand already done, or could things get worse for King Charles?
Oh, the things could get much worse. I mean, what Andrew has done has been to open the floodgates here. And now questions are being asked not simply about Andrew, but about royal finances, quite rightly. The House of Commons Public Accounts Committee are looking into Crown Estate properties and why Andrew and Edward have been living on a peppercorn rent for enormous properties. So a whole lot of questions which have been building up for many years, and which, by the way, I set out in my book, are now being actively looked at, not simply by the media, but by Parliament as well. So this has got a long way to run, and a whole lot of unpleasant material from the royal family's point of view is going to come out, I think. In terms of the narrow aspect of Andrew, then there are questions to be asked of Charles and William as to what they knew when. Because, you know, we were reporting, I was reporting as an MP 20 years ago about the excessive behaviour of Andrew when he was a trade envoy, about the private jets he was taking at public expense to go and play golf, that sort of thing. So they've done nothing about him for a very long period of time. So they've got questions to answer too.
It's hard to imagine, isn't it, that the palace authorities, the management of the monarchy, who are known as the firm, and the key players, Charles and others, didn't know that, to a degree, Andrew was a problematic member of the family.
They did know, obviously they knew, and the strategy from the royal family always, throughout the decades, has been to try to smother things over and hope they'll go away. And that was a strategy they employed for quite a long period of time. When that didn't work, the second strategy was to say, this is Andrew, nothing to do with us, we're immune from this, ring-fence Andrew is a problem. But I'm afraid, you know, the third stage, which we're now entering, is, you know, what did they know about it? And what have they done about all this? Not simply the trade envoy matters, but also the allegations to do with Virginia Giuffre and others.
Now, politics, of course, is an area about which you know a lot, Norman, as a former Member of Parliament yourself. And in politics, if you've got a cabinet minister or even the Prime Minister that presides over a scandal, even if it's not their fault, they will normally step down in order to diffuse the situation and put a full stop on the issue. Could this lead to Charles being unseated from the throne?
I don't think that's going to happen, but what I think there is a mounting pressure on is to remove Andrew from the line of succession. Let's be quite clear. He's eighth in line to the throne. He's not likely to get there. But you know, in the event that Charles had died before William and Harry were born, we would now be having King Andrew I on the throne. So, you know, the system is not very perfect, is it?
No, it isn't. And it would require a special act of Parliament and the agreement of Commonwealth nations. Do you think it will happen?
I don't think Charles will be removed as a consequence of this, but I think the monarchy will have to amend its ways. Yeah. It will have to become more transparent, far more accountable. It will have to become better value for money from the taxpayer. He's going to have to recalculate and refabricate the firm in a way that he doesn't want to do, to make it much more like a European monarchy. If he doesn't do that, then my word of advice for him is the tree that doesn't bend will break.
Yes, well, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor denies all wrongdoing. He's not been arrested for anything surrounding Virginia Giuffre or any other allegation that followed the release of the Epstein files. Can I also bring you up to speed on another developing story, Norman? And it's a photograph published by the respected US media outlet TMZ. And it's photographs of Andrew, we understand, in the Royal Lodge on the Windsor Estate with a young child, maybe 12 or 18 months of age, playing with a ball which is an exact replica of a female breast. Just your reaction to this?
Well, we don't know who the child. I didn't know that picture before you've just introduced it, Mark, and,
yeah.
and I don't know we don't know who the child is, and nor should we know probably. But I mean, that's very tacky, isn't it? But I mean, Andrew is tacky. I mean, up at Royal Lodge, he had a toilet roll holder that played God Save the Queen when you pulled the paper.
You couldn't make it up, could you? Norman, lovely to see you. Do join us again soon. It's been a long time since we spoke on the radio and the telly. Norman Baker is the author of What Do You Do? What the Royal Family Don't Want You to Know. Norman says that actually this police investigation means that we will have full access to the financial dealings of the Royal Family, which could be a headache for the King.